A passport is a small booklet of leather and ink. Yet in Ouagadougou, on the 2nd of February 2025, it became a thunderclap. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, leader of Burkina Faso, held aloft the first AES passport, a document born not from permission, but from defiance. Hours later, the world was flooded with headlines and rumors. Rejected in Europe. Denied by China. The shortest live passport in history. What was meant to be a celebration of unity turned into a storm of doubt. But here lies the paradox. The same document dismissed online as fake had already been coded to the standards of the International Civil Aviation Organization. The same booklet mocked as invalid was soon stamped with Schengen visas and Chinese entry permits. What was designed to humiliate became a weapon of dignity. This is more than a story about travel documents. It is a story about sovereignty, about who has the right to decide Africa's legitimacy, Africans themselves, or outsiders who still cling to power. Stay with us. This is not merely a headline, it is a turning point in history. Subscribe and walk with us through the road ahead. On the 2nd of February 2025, the city of Ouagadougou did not simply host a ceremony, it witnessed a proclamation. Beneath banners of deep blue and gold, citizens lined up as the Alliance of Sahel states, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, unveiled a joint passport. Cameras captured Captain Ibrahim Traoré handing the very first booklet to an ordinary citizen. The crowd erupted, not because a new travel document existed, but because a new symbol had been born. This passport was more than paper and chip. It was the seed of a new tree planted in Sahel soil. For generations, West African identity had been mediated by outsiders, whether through the colonial cartographer's pen or through regional blocs perceived as extensions of foreign capitals. In 2024, the three states took the audacious step of withdrawing from ECOWAS, forfeiting the privileges of its regional passport system. Critics declared that the decision would isolate their citizens, leave them stranded at consulates, strip them of mobility. Yet instead of retreating, these nations chose to build. The AES passport became the bridge they constructed to cross their own river. From its very design, the message was clear. The dark blue cover, embossed with a golden insignia of the alliance, echoed the imagery of strength and unity. Government officials spoke of it as both shield and key, a shield against the narratives of dependency, and a key to unlock the next chapter of integration on their own terms. Ordinary people arriving at the launch posed for cameras, proudly holding their booklets aloft. One student remarked to a local broadcaster that it was not about convenience, but about pride. Carrying the AES passport meant carrying the dignity of an independent Sahel. Yet even as the ink dried on the first visas, the storm began. Within hours, social media was ablaze with rumors. Viral TikTok clips declared it the shortest-lived passport in history. Hashtags on Twitter claimed France had rejected it, that the European Union refused to update its systems, that even China had turned it away. The speed of disinformation traveled faster than the truth. Confusion spread among citizens scrolling their feeds. How could leaders unveil such a document publicly if it was already worthless? Here we see the familiar script of narrative warfare. Each sovereignty initiative by the Sahel, whether Mali's withdrawal from French-led missions or Burkina Faso's nationalization of its gold sector, had been met with scarce stories of collapse and isolation. The AES passport fit this pattern perfectly. What should have been a straightforward act of integration was reframed as humiliation. But the reality was more complex. At the technical level, the passport was designed in compliance with International Civil Aviation Organization standards. This meant that for airlines, border systems, and international law, it was valid from the start. Legitimacy in air travel does not depend on the whims of Paris or Brussels, but on ICAO coding. This truth, however, was drowned beneath a tide of manufactured doubt. The launch of the AES passport thus became more than an administrative step. It became a test of resilience, a question of whether African nations could define their own symbols without waiting for outside validation. It revealed the chasm between perception and reality, between the soil where seeds are planted and the winds that try to scatter them. And so the stage was set. A small booklet had become a battlefield. A tool of mobility had transformed into a litmus test for sovereignty. As citizens clutched their new passports with pride, the world asked in disbelief, who would be the first to accept, and who would be the first to reject? The unveiling of the AES passport should have been a celebration, a simple procession of pride and unity. Instead, within hours, it collided with the raw machinery of narrative warfare. By the evening of the 2nd of February, screens across Africa and beyond were filled with claims that the passport was already invalid. A video on TikTok, slickly edited with dramatic music, proclaimed, "This is the shortest-lived passport in history." Twitter accounts amplified the same message, asserting that France had rejected the document, that European embassies had already refused visas, that China itself had turned its back. For ordinary citizens in Bamako or Niamey, scrolling through their feeds, the effect was dizzying. How could a passport unveiled before cameras in Ouagadougou be dismissed as worthless within hours? Families gathered around televisions as broadcasters replayed the launch, but the contrast between official footage and online rumors sowed confusion. Pride wrestled with doubt. In Ouagadougou, leaders moved quickly. Government spokespeople reminded the public that the passport was compliant with International Civil Aviation Organization standards, meaning its technical validity was beyond dispute. But logic rarely moves as fast as rumor. For every statement issued, a dozen posts appeared claiming otherwise. The battle was no longer about facts, but about perception. International media entered the fray. Headlines in Western outlets framed the story not as Africa's bold experiment in integration, but as a question mark. Will the world accept? This framing amplified the sense of uncertainty. Instead of celebrating a sovereignty milestone, the debate was recast into a test of external approval. It was a familiar script, one that reduced African agency to the status of applicant rather than architect. Yet inside the Sahel, another story was unfolding. In Niamey, citizens queued outside government offices to inquire about applications. In Bamako, young people posed with their new booklets, posting photos online with captions that turned pride into defiance. For them, the AES passport was not just a tool of travel. It was a shield of independence. Carrying it was a way of declaring, we belong to a union of our own making. Observers noted the striking similarity between this controversy and earlier campaigns of disinformation. When Mali withdrew from French-led military operations, narratives of isolation were pumped through media channels. When Burkina Faso nationalized parts of its gold sector, scare stories of economic collapse spread like wildfire. Each assertion of sovereignty was met not merely with criticism, but with orchestrated attempts to delegitimize. The AES passport fit the same mold. By mid-February, the contradictions of the rumors began to surface. Travelers reported that while European consulates initially struggled, their systems still coded for ECOWAS templates. No formal policy of rejection existed. Clerks manually overrode software or temporarily placed applications on hold. What looked like refusal was, in fact, bureaucracy catching up. Yet in the public imagination, these delays were interpreted as rejection, giving oxygen to the narrative of failure. Meanwhile, analysts at Disinfo Africa traced the origins of many viral posts. Their report concluded that the controversy was not organic. Coordinated accounts, posting in multiple languages within minutes of each other, had amplified the message of rejection. Videos showing supposed confiscations at European borders turned out to be fabrications, stitched together from unrelated footage. The aim was not to debate legality, but to erode confidence, to humiliate. In the midst of this storm, the contrast between Europe and China became the dramatic fulcrum of the story. European embassies remained silent, allowing misinformation to circulate unchecked. Technical updates to the Schengen information system moved at a glacial pace, reinforcing the impression of reluctance. Citizens were left in limbo, their applications paused, their dignity questioned. Then came Beijing. Within days of the launch, Chinese embassies in Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou issued statements confirming that the AES passport would be accepted for visa applications. At a press conference in Beijing, the foreign ministry dismissed the rumors of rejection as baseless. Unlike Europe, which stumbled through administrative hesitation, China treated the document as a straightforward fact of international law. For AES citizens, this clarity was electrifying. Social media filled with relief, images of passports stamped with Chinese visas, proof that the world's second-largest economy recognized their sovereignty without hesitation. It was at this moment that the AES passport moved from administrative novelty to geopolitical symbol. On one side stood Europe, entangled in bureaucracy, shadowed by colonial legacies, slow to clarify. On the other stood China, decisive and unambiguous, seizing the chance to align itself with Africa's assertion of dignity. The climax was not a gunshot or a battlefield. It was a stamp in a booklet, a simple act of recognition that revealed the balance of global power shifting before our eyes. And yet the story did not end with validation. For behind the headlines and diplomatic statements, a deeper question was emerging. If disinformation could nearly derail a sovereignty project within hours, what would happen when the next initiative arose? The dust of rumors may settle quickly online, but in the streets of Bamako, Niamey, and Ouagadougou, the consequences of the AES passport were lived in daily rhythms. Citizens queued outside offices, filling out forms, submitting photographs, and waiting patiently for their new document. For many, the process was slow, even cumbersome, yet they persevered. What mattered was not efficiency, but symbolism. To hold the AES passport was to hold proof that one's nation could stand without leaning on structures dominated by Paris or Brussels. In the short term, however, challenges were undeniable. Travelers attempting to use the new passport encountered confusion at consulates. Appointment systems had not been updated. Border clerks had to manually override databases still programmed with ECOWAS templates. Some applications were placed on hold for weeks. Families complained of delays in securing visas for study or medical treatment abroad. These frictions were real, and critics were quick to amplify them as signs of failure. Yet within the region itself, the passport became a catalyst for pride. Students carried it as a badge of defiance. Traders spoke of it as a shield against humiliation. In rural communities where international travel was rare, the symbolism resonated even more deeply. Villagers interviewed on local radio explained that they may never need to use the document, but they celebrated it as proof that their country was no longer dependent on foreign approval. Sovereignty was not an abstract principle. It was something you could tuck into your pocket. Politically, the AES passport consolidated a narrative of resilience that had begun with the seismic shifts of 2022. When Captain Ibrahim Traoré assumed leadership in Burkina Faso through what many observers called the Ibrahim Traoré coup, he framed his mission as one of reclaiming dignity from external tutelage. The passport now served as a continuation of that trajectory, a practical tool that turned rhetoric into reality. By placing sovereignty into the hands of citizens, the leadership moved beyond speeches and into the realm of daily life. In Niger and Mali, similar sentiments prevailed. Leaders emphasized that the AES passport was not simply a replacement for ECOWAS documents, but a foundation stone for new institutions. It represented the ambition to build integration from within, rather than rely on frameworks shaped elsewhere. Politicians in the region spoke of expanding the alliance, of inviting other states to join, and of creating not only mobility but markets, security partnerships, and joint infrastructure projects. The passport was the opening chord of a longer symphony. Still, the political terrain was not without hazards. Opposition voices warned that practical difficulties could erode public support. If citizens continued to face obstacles at foreign consulates, frustration might outweigh pride. Rumors of rejection, even when false, could chip away at confidence. The governments of AES understood this risk, which is why they invested heavily in communication campaigns. National broadcasters aired footage of passports stamped with Schengen visas. Newspapers ran stories of traders crossing borders without incident. These narratives were designed to reinforce confidence, to remind citizens that the experiment was working. Economically, the passport's impact was less immediate, but no less significant. By formalizing a collective identity, it laid the groundwork for regional markets free from ECOWAS oversight. Officials spoke of harmonizing tariffs, simplifying cross-border trade, and pooling resources for infrastructure. Critics scoffed, pointing to the immense logistical hurdles. But for supporters, the very act of imagining such possibilities was transformative. It signaled a break from the fatalism of dependence. At the societal level, the AES passport also reshaped conversations about identity. For decades, Africans had been told that their documents were valid only when recognized abroad. The new booklet reversed the hierarchy. Its legitimacy began at home. Parents told their children that carrying it meant they belonged to a union forged by African hands. Youth activists framed it as a weapon against humiliation, a declaration that no one else had the authority to define their belonging. The resonance of this symbolism cannot be underestimated. In a region scarred by coups, insurgencies, and economic struggles, the passport offered a narrative of continuity and hope. It was a rare instance where sovereignty was not restricted to speeches at summits, but translated into a physical object every citizen could own. That act of democratizing sovereignty shifted the emotional landscape. And yet questions lingered. Would the passport remain a source of pride if foreign systems continued to delay recognition? Could a document alone sustain the momentum of sovereignty? The governments of AES placed their bet on resilience. They argued that by embedding sovereignty into institutions, by giving citizens a tangible reminder of independence, they could weather the storms of disinformation and bureaucracy alike. In this sense, the AES passport was not merely about travel. It was about rewriting the psychology of a people long conditioned to seek validation from outside. It challenged the assumption that dignity is granted by others. Instead, it proclaimed that dignity begins at home. But the story did not end there. For as citizens clutched their booklets with pride, eyes turned outward once more. The question grew louder. How would the wider world, allies, rivals, institutions, respond to this new experiment in sovereignty? The launch of the AES passport did not unfold in a vacuum. It reverberated across the corridors of diplomacy, forcing regional and global actors to reveal their stances toward African sovereignty. In Europe, the reaction was hesitant, almost reluctant. No government issued a formal declaration of rejection, yet silence in the early days allowed misinformation to flourish unchecked. The heart of the problem was bureaucratic. The Schengen information system had not yet been updated to include AES templates. Consular clerks were left improvising, either manually overriding databases or placing applications on hold. For travelers, these technical hiccups looked like rejection. For critics online, they became fuel for the narrative that Europe had turned its back. But the hesitation was not evenly spread. Observers noted that Eastern European states, less entangled in colonial history, adapted faster. Hungary and Poland quietly updated their systems, processing applications with fewer delays. Meanwhile, France and other countries with deep ties to the Sahel remained slow, their silence interpreted as political resistance. The uneven pace betrayed an uncomfortable truth. Europe's response was filtered not only through software, but through the weight of history. Across the Atlantic, Washington watched carefully. Official statements were scarce, reflecting a policy of cautious observation. Analysts speculated that the United States was less concerned about the passport itself than about what it symbolized. Would the AES alliance pivot further toward alternative partners such as Russia or China? Would the passport facilitate migration flows that Washington has long linked to regional instability? Without clear answers, the U.S. adopted a wait-and-see posture, unwilling to rush but unwilling to endorse. Then came the striking contrast: China. Unlike Europe's hesitant bureaucracies or America's strategic silence, Beijing acted with clarity. Within days of the launch, Chinese embassies in Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey confirmed recognition of the AES passport. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing dismissed the rumors of rejection outright, calling them baseless and affirming the document's validity for visa applications. For AES citizens, the message was unmistakable. China treated their sovereignty as fact, not as a question awaiting approval. This divergence carried symbolic weight far beyond consular desks. Europe's delays reflected suspicion and colonial baggage. America's silence reflected strategic calculation. China's swift recognition reflected a philosophy of partnership in a multipolar world. For Africans, the contrast was instructive. It revealed who was prepared to accept them as equals and who still hesitated. One analyst in West Africa described the passport as a litmus test of 21st century diplomacy. It is no longer about a piece of paper, he said. It is about who respects Africa's right to define itself. For supporters of the AES alliance, this moment marked a new phase of the Burkina Faso revolution, a broader movement in which sovereignty was asserted not only on the battlefield or in speeches, but in the quiet authority of documents carried by ordinary people. The question now was whether these international stances would harden into policy. Would Europe accelerate its adjustments, or would hesitation remain the norm? Would Washington shift from watchfulness to engagement? Would Beijing translate symbolic recognition into deeper partnerships? The answers were uncertain, but the stakes could not have been higher. And so, as the AES passport circulated across borders, it carried more than citizens. It carried the weight of Africa's contested place in the world order, and the revelation that not all global powers viewed sovereignty through the same lens. The AES passport is only the beginning. A booklet of paper and ink may seem fragile, yet it has already unsettled systems that once appeared immovable. What comes next will determine whether the passport remains a symbolic gesture or evolves into the cornerstone of a new regional order. One possible future lies in expansion. Officials within Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have hinted that the door is open for other states disillusioned with ECOWAS or frustrated by dependence on foreign structures. If additional members join, the AES passport could transform from a Sahelian initiative into a broader continental project. In that scenario, the document would no longer be an exception, but a precedent, a sign that Africa can construct institutions without waiting for permission. Yet risks abound. Disinformation networks have already demonstrated their ability to sow doubt within hours. Each fresh sovereignty initiative will likely be targeted in the same way. Critics will claim collapse, rejection, or futility. The challenge for AES governments will be to respond faster than rumors spread, to counter narratives not only with statements, but with lived proof. Visas granted, borders crossed, citizens traveling with dignity intact. Bureaucratic delays also remain a hurdle. Europe's adjustment to the AES passport was sluggish, reflecting deeper discomfort with African autonomy. If such reluctance continues, frustration among ordinary citizens could grow. Sovereignty, after all, must be validated in practice as much as in principle. Without smooth mobility, the passport risks being perceived as symbolic rather than functional. Economically, the path ahead is both promising and perilous. A common passport could underpin efforts to harmonize tariffs, streamline trade, and create shared markets. Traders dream of crossing borders without harassment, of moving goods across the Sahel under a single banner. But the practicalities of integration, from customs regulations to digital infrastructure, are formidable. Success will require not only vision, but sustained coordination, investment, and political will. At the societal level, the passport's greatest gift may be psychological. For too long, Africans have been told that legitimacy must come from elsewhere. To carry an AES passport is to carry a different message. Sovereignty begins at home. If this belief takes root in a new generation, it could reshape politics, culture, and identity across the region. And so the road ahead is neither straight nor smooth. It is a path lined with challenges, disinformation, bureaucracy, suspicion, yet also fertile with possibility. Like a seed planted in contested soil, the AES passport must weather storms before it grows into a tree of shade and strength. But this is not the end. The real test lies in what comes next, when Africa must decide not only how to defend its sovereignty, but how to wield it. The AES passport began as a booklet, deep blue, gold embossed, carried by farmers, students, and traders. Yet within days it revealed itself as something larger, a mirror of Africa's struggle for sovereignty. What was dismissed as the shortest-lived passport in history became proof that Africans could validate themselves, regardless of who hesitated abroad. In Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, the message resonated: legitimacy is not a gift from outsiders. It is born in the soil of one's own land. The passport turned dignity into a daily act. Every stamp, every journey, every queue of citizens applying was a quiet revolution. The story of the Ibrahim Traoré coup was not only about seizing power in a moment of upheaval, it was about laying the groundwork for institutions that would embody independence. The passport is one such institution. It demonstrates that sovereignty can be carried in a pocket, that pride can be renewed each time a citizen presents their document at a border. The wider world has revealed its fault lines. Europe hesitated, entangled in bureaucracy and colonial memory. The United States observed, cautious and calculating. China responded with clarity, affirming Africa's right to act on its own terms. The contrast spoke volumes about who was willing to treat Africa as an equal partner. For Burkina Faso and its allies, this is more than paperwork. It is part of a wider Burkina Faso revolution, a movement of dignity that stretches beyond speeches and into daily life. It is the continuation of a path opened by the Ibrahim Traoré coup, where sovereignty is not merely declared, but woven into the ordinary lives of people. The future remains uncertain. Disinformation will evolve. Bureaucracy will resist. Yet the passport stands as a reminder that sovereignty is not decided in foreign capitals, but in the hearts of citizens. It is a seed planted against the winds of doubt, a seed that, if nurtured, may one day grow into a tree shading an entire continent. If you believe Africa's future must be written by African hands, stay with us. Subscribe, share this story, and carry the journey forward.